Hello, my fear seekers. I'm your fear master. Have you ever heard footsteps behind you, only to turn around and see no one there? Don't worry. It's probably just your mind playing tricks on you. Or maybe it's not. Tonight I'm taking you to a place where the unseen becomes deadly. So turn off the lights, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, and prepare yourself for the unimaginable. And if you have a chilling story to share, send it to the email in the description. You could be the next star of our tales. The rolling hills of the Pine Ridge Trail had always called to me, promising solitude and a break from the chaos of everyday life. My name is David, and I had been planning this solo hiking trip for months, eager to immerse myself in the untouched beauty of the wilderness. I started my journey from the trailhead at Dawn Valley, with the goal of reaching the ancient oak forest, a place I'd dreamed of exploring for years. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. The weather was perfect, and the trail, though challenging, rewarded me with breathtaking views and a deep sense of peace. Each night, I set up camp in a different spot, feeling the weight of the world lift as I disconnected from it all. The isolation was invigorating, a chance to clear my mind and find a bit of inner peace. But as the days passed, I started to notice signs that I wasn't alone. Campsites that looked freshly used, footprints that didn't match mine, small things that began to gnaw at the back of my mind. It wasn't unusual to see signs of other hikers on the trail, but something felt off. Maybe it was the way the air felt thicker, or the way the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end every time I came across these traces. On the fourth day, I took a detour from the main trail to find a water source. It was a small, clear stream tucked away in a hidden grove. As I bent down to refill my water bottles, I heard a rustling in the bushes. I looked up and saw a man watching me from a distance. His clothes were tattered, his hair wild and unkempt, and there was a crazed intensity in his eyes that sent a chill down my spine. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound friendly despite the unease creeping up my spine. He didn't respond, just stared at me, unblinking. After what felt like an eternity, he turned and disappeared into the woods. I shrugged it off as just another hiker, maybe one who preferred solitude as much as I did. But that night, as I set up camp, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig, made my heart skip a beat. I tried to tell myself it was just nerves, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Around midnight, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside my tent. Slow, deliberate footsteps. My heart pounded as I reached for my flashlight. I unzipped the tent just enough to shine the light outside, but saw nothing. The footsteps stopped, and the forest fell silent once again. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening, waiting, the darkness pressing in on me from all sides. The next morning I packed up quickly, eager to put some distance between myself and whatever, or whoever, was out there. I pushed hard that day, hiking longer and faster than I had planned, driven by a growing sense of unease. By late afternoon I was exhausted, my nerves frayed. As I rounded a bend in the trail, I saw him again, the man from the stream. He was sitting on a rock, staring at the ground. As I approached, he looked up, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "You're on my land," he said, his voice rough and accusing. "I'm sorry," I replied, trying to stay calm. "I'm just passing through. This is the Pine Ridge Trail." "You're lying," he snapped, standing up and pointing a finger at me. "You think I don't know? You're one of them, aren't you? Sent here to watch me." My heart raced. "No, I swear. I'm just a hiker. I'm not here to watch anyone." He didn't seem to hear me. "They're always watching. The government, the spies. They think they can fool me. But I see everything." His voice was rising, his eyes wild with paranoia. I knew I had to get out of there. Slowly, I started backing away, keeping my hands up in a gesture of peace. But before I could turn to leave, he lunged at me, screaming. Instinct took over. I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest, adrenaline surging through my veins. I could hear him crashing through the underbrush behind me, his shouts echoing through the trees. I didn't know where I was going. I just ran, desperate to put as much distance between us as possible. The forest was dense, the terrain rough, but I didn't dare slow down. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning with effort. I could hear him gaining on me, his footsteps relentless. I veered off the trail, hoping to lose him in the thick undergrowth. Branches scratched my face and arms as I pushed through, but I didn't stop. Finally, after what felt like hours, I stumbled upon an abandoned cabin hidden deep in the woods. I didn't think. I just ran inside and slammed the door behind me, my heart racing. The cabin was dark, musty, but it felt like a haven compared to the terror outside. I crouched in a corner, trying to catch my breath, listening for any sign of him. Minutes passed, then an hour. I heard nothing but the sound of my own breathing. Slowly, the adrenaline began to wear off, replaced by a bone-deep exhaustion. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, but the thought of going back outside filled me with dread. As dawn broke, I cautiously stepped out of the cabin. The forest was eerily silent, the early morning light casting long shadows across the ground. I didn't see him anywhere, but I knew I couldn't relax. I started moving again, sticking close to the trail, my senses on high alert. It took me the rest of the day to reach a ranger station. By the time I stumbled through the door, I was exhausted, disheveled, and shaken to my core. The rangers listened to my story, their faces serious. They assured me I was safe now, but I couldn't shake the fear that had taken root inside me. I left the Pine Ridge Trail that day, my dream of completing it shattered. The experience left me scarred, both physically and mentally. I still love hiking, but I haven't been able to bring myself to return to the trail. Even now, sometimes, I wake up in the middle of the night, convinced I hear footsteps outside my window. The boundary waters of Minnesota had always been a favorite destination for my friends and me. The serene lakes, dense forests, and the promise of untouched wilderness made it the perfect escape from the pressures of daily life. We had been planning this trip for months. Mark, Jenny, Sarah, and I, all excited to spend a week canoeing, fishing, and camping under the stars. We set out early on a clear summer morning, our canoes loaded with gear and spirits high. The sun was shining, and the water was calm as we paddled deeper into the wilderness, leaving civilization far behind. The further we went, the more isolated we felt, which was exactly what we wanted. For the first few days, everything was perfect. We found a great campsite on the edge of a quiet lake, surrounded by towering pines. and with a clear view of the night sky. We spent our days exploring the area, fishing in the crystal-clear waters, and our nights around the campfire, laughing and telling stories. It felt like we were the only people in the world. On the fourth day, we decided to venture further into the wilderness, exploring a part of the boundary waters we hadn't been to before. We paddled for hours, the landscape growing more rugged and wild with each stroke. By mid-afternoon, we stumbled upon a small, secluded bay, hidden from view by thick trees and underbrush. As we paddled closer, we noticed something unusual, a cabin tucked away at the edge of the bay. It looked old, weathered by years of exposure to the elements. The roof sagged, and the windows were covered with grime, but it was clearly still standing. Curiosity got the better of us, and we decided to check it out. We beached our canoes and made our way through the underbrush, the cabin looming larger as we approached. "This is so cool," Mark said, his voice filled with excitement. "It's like finding a piece of history." "Or a horror movie," Jenny muttered, glancing around nervously. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cabin felt out of place, like it didn't belong there. But we were already there, and my curiosity outweighed my unease. The door creaked loudly as Mark pushed it open, revealing a dark, musty interior. The air was thick with the smell of damp wood and decay. Inside, the cabin was sparsely furnished. A rickety table, a few chairs, and a wood stove that looked like it hadn't been used in decades. Dust covered everything, and cobwebs hung from the ceiling like tattered curtains. It was clear that no one had been here in a long time. "This place is creepy," Sarah whispered, her voice echoing slightly in the empty space. "Yeah, let's just take a quick look and get out of here," I agreed, feeling increasingly uneasy. As we explored the cabin, Mark found an old journal tucked away in a drawer. He flipped through the pages, the paper brittle and yellowed with age. The entries were short, written in a shaky hand, and detailed the day-to-day life of someone living alone in the wilderness. The last entry was dated over 50 years ago and ended abruptly with a cryptic sentence. "They're watching me. I have to leave." A chill ran down my spine as I read those words over Mark's shoulder. "We should go," I said, my voice firm. "This place gives me the creeps." We made our way back to the canoes, but the unease lingered. The fog was so thick now that we could barely see a few feet in front of us. As we pushed off from the shore, I felt a sense of dread settle in the pit of my stomach. Something wasn't right. We paddled in silence, each of us lost in our thoughts, the fog pressing in around us like a living thing. I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced that we were being watched, but there was nothing there, only the thick, swirling mist. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the fog, followed by a splash in the water near Jenny's canoe. We froze, our hearts racing. Another crack, and this time the water erupted right next to Mark's canoe. It took a moment for the realization to hit. Someone was shooting at us. "Paddle, now!" I shouted, and we all started paddling frantically, our canoes cutting through the water as fast as we could manage. The fog made it impossible to see where the shots were coming from, but they kept coming, each one closer than the last. Panic surged through me as we zigzagged through the water, trying to make ourselves harder targets. The sound of the gunshots echoed in the fog, disorienting us even more. My arms burned with the effort of paddling, but I didn't dare slow down. We had to get out of there, Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we broke through the fog and into clear water. The shots stopped, but we didn't slow down until we reached the safety of the opposite shore. We collapsed on the bank, gasping for breath, our hearts still pounding. "What the hell was that?" Mark gasped, his face pale. "I don't know, but we need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "We're not safe here." We quickly packed up our gear and left the area, paddling back to our original campsite in record time. None of us spoke much on the way back, the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. The Boundary Waters, which had always been a place of peace and adventure, now felt like a place of danger and fear. When we finally made it back to civilization, we reported what had happened to the authorities. But we knew they wouldn't find much. The wilderness is vast, and the people who hide in it know how to stay hidden. We were lucky to have made it out alive, but the experience left a scar on all of us. The Boundary Waters, once our favorite escape, would never feel the same again. The cabin, the fog, the gunshots, those memories would haunt us for a long time to come. We had gone looking for adventure, but we found something much more terrifying than we ever could have imagined. The Badlands had always been a place of stark beauty to me, a rugged landscape of twisted canyons and barren rock formations that seemed to stretch on forever. It was the perfect place to clear my mind, to escape the noise of the city. So when I decided to take a solo trip into the heart of the Badlands, I didn't expect anything more than solitude and maybe a few close encounters with wildlife. My name is Tom, and I've always been an avid hiker and nature enthusiast. I packed my gear, stocked up on supplies, and set out early one morning, eager to spend a few days off the grid. The trails I chose were remote, far from the usual tourist spots, exactly what I was looking for. The first day went as planned. I hiked deep into the Badlands, marveling at the alien landscape around me. The sky was a clear, brilliant blue, and the only sounds were the crunch of gravel under my boots and the occasional cry of a distant bird. It was peaceful, almost meditative. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I decided to set up camp near a secluded canyon. The walls of the canyon provided shelter from the wind, and the view was nothing short of spectacular. I set up my tent, cooked a simple meal, and watched the stars begin to fill the sky. It was exactly the escape I had been craving. But that night, as I was settling into my tent, I noticed something unusual. A faint light flickering in the distance, just beyond the canyon. At first I thought it was a reflection, maybe from a distant campsite or passing vehicle, but there was no one else around for miles. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously made my way toward the light. The ground was uneven, the rocky terrain making each step deliberate and slow. As I drew closer, the light grew brighter, and I realized it was coming from a small hidden valley just beyond the canyon. What I saw when I reached the edge made my blood run cold. There, in the middle of the valley, was a group of men gathered around a table illuminated by lanterns. They were well dressed, their suits a stark contrast to the rugged surroundings. Among them were faces I recognized, local politicians, men I had seen on the news, shaking hands and making promises. But there were others, too, men whose hardened faces and cold eyes spoke of a different kind of power. They were deep in discussion, their voices low and serious. It didn't take long to realize what I was witnessing. A clandestine meeting between corrupt politicians and dangerous criminals. They were planning something big, and I had just stumbled upon it. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly backed away, trying to remain unseen. But as I turned to leave, my foot slipped on a loose rock, sending it clattering down the canyon wall. The sound echoed through the night, and every head in the valley snapped in my direction. "Who's there?" one of the men shouted, his voice laced with authority and menace. Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, adrenaline flooding my system as I sprinted back the way I had come. Behind me, I heard shouts and the sound of footsteps pounding after me. They were coming. The Badlands, which had felt so peaceful just hours before, now seemed like a maze of jagged rocks and shadowy canyons, each turn leading me deeper into danger. My mind raced, trying to think of a way out, but I was unfamiliar with this part of the trail, and the darkness made everything look the same. I could hear them getting closer, their voices carrying through the night. I knew I couldn't outrun them forever. I needed to find a place to hide. As I rounded a bend, I spotted a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. It was a tight fit, but I squeezed in, pressing myself against the cold stone, trying to make myself as small as possible. The footsteps grew louder, then slowed as they neared my hiding spot. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense. The men were close, too close. I could hear them talking, their voices low and threatening. "He couldn't have gone far," one of them said. "Spread out. Find him." I stayed perfectly still, willing myself to be invisible. They moved past me, their flashlights sweeping the ground just inches from where I hid. I waited until their voices faded into the distance before daring to move. When I was sure they were gone, I crawled out of the crevice and continued down the canyon, my heart still pounding. I knew I had to get out of there, but I had no idea how far they would go to keep their secret. I couldn't go back the way I came. There was no telling if they had set up an ambush. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and exhaustion. I navigated the rocky terrain as quickly and quietly as I could, every shadow a potential threat. By the time dawn began to break, I was completely spent, my body aching and my mind numb with terror. Finally, I stumbled upon a road, a small dusty road that led to one of the main highways. I followed it, my legs barely able to carry me, until I reached a gas station just as the sun was rising. I was safe, but the ordeal had left me shaken to my core. I reported what I had seen to the authorities, but I knew it would be an uphill battle. The men I had witnessed were powerful, with connections that ran deep. I couldn't shake the feeling that they would be coming for me, that they wouldn't let me walk away knowing what I did. I left the Badlands that day, vowing never to return. The landscape that had once brought me peace and solitude was now tainted with fear. The beauty of the Badlands had hidden something dark and dangerous, and I had been lucky to escape with my life. I had always loved the tranquility of the Blue Ridge Mountains, the way the rolling hills and dense forests seemed to stretch on forever. After a few months of relentless work, I needed a break, a chance to clear my head and find some peace in the wilderness. A solo hiking trip seemed like the perfect escape. My name is Alex, and I've been hiking for as long as I can remember. The mountains have always been my refuge, a place where I could disconnect from the world and just be. So I packed my gear, threw it in the back of my truck, and set out early on a crisp autumn morning. eager to leave the noise of the city behind. The first few days were exactly what I needed. The trails were quiet, the air was cool and fresh, and the views were breathtaking. I hiked deep into the mountains, following a less traveled path that led me away from the more popular spots. It was perfect, just me, the trees, and the occasional rustle of wildlife in the underbrush. But on the third day, things took a strange turn. I was making my way down a narrow trail when I noticed something out of place, footprints in the mud, but not the kind left by a hiker. These were heavier, deeper, like someone carrying a heavy load. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I continued, I started noticing more signs, broken branches, discarded trash, and then, a bit further down the trail, an old weathered tent tucked away in the bushes. It looked abandoned, but something about it made me uneasy. The fabric was torn, and there were signs of a struggle. Scattered belongings, a backpack ripped open, and its contents strewn across the ground. My instincts told me to turn around, but curiosity got the better of me. I stepped closer, peering inside the tent, and that's when I saw it. A duffel bag, half-zipped, with stacks of cash spilling out. My heart skipped a beat. This wasn't just an abandoned campsite. Something had gone very wrong here. I backed away slowly, my mind racing. I needed to get out of there, but as I turned to leave, I heard voices, low, angry voices coming from deeper in the woods. Panic surged through me. Whoever was out there, they were close, and it didn't take much to guess that they wouldn't be happy to find me snooping around their stash. I started moving, trying to stay quiet, but the trail was narrow, the leaves crunching under my boots with every step. The voices grew louder, and I could hear them getting closer. I glanced over my shoulder and saw them. 2 men, rough-looking, with the kind of hard eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. They spotted me, and without a word, they broke into a run. Adrenaline kicked in, and I took off, sprinting down the trail as fast as I could. The trees blurred around me as I ducked under low-hanging branches and leapt over fallen logs. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to keep moving, to not let them catch me. I didn't know the trail well, but I didn't have a choice. I veered off the path, hoping the dense forest would slow them down, but I could still hear them crashing through the underbrush behind me, cursing and shouting at each other. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew I couldn't keep this up for long, but stopping wasn't an option. I didn't know the trail well, but I didn't have a choice. I veered off the path, hoping the dense forest would slow them down, but I could still hear them crashing through the underbrush behind me, cursing and shouting at each other. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I knew I couldn't keep this up for long, but stopping wasn't an option. The forest was thick, the terrain rough, and every step was a battle. I stumbled over rocks, my feet slipping on the damp leaves, but I kept going. I had to. The sound of their pursuit was relentless, a constant reminder that they were right behind me, closing the gap. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I spotted a narrow ravine up ahead. It was steep, the sides covered in loose dirt and jagged rocks, but it was my only chance. I didn't think, I just jumped, sliding down the slope, the earth giving way under my weight. I hit the bottom hard, the impact jarring, but I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran, using the ravine as cover. The shouts above grew fainter as I put more distance between us, but I didn't slow down. I knew they were still out there, still looking for me. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. but all I could think about was getting as far away as possible. As night fell, I stumbled upon a small clearing, a dirt road cutting through the trees. I followed it, my legs barely able to carry me, until I saw headlights in the distance. A car was approaching, and I waved it down, desperate for help. The driver, an older man, looked at me with concern and asked what had happened. I told him enough to understand I was in danger, and he offered to take me to the nearest town. I spent the rest of the night at a small motel, my mind reeling from the ordeal. The authorities were called, but I knew they wouldn't find much. The mountains were vast, and the men who had chased me knew how to disappear. I was safe, but I couldn't shake the fear that had taken hold of me. The Blue Ridge Mountains, once a place of peace and solitude for me, now felt like a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong. I left the mountains the next day, vowing to never hike alone again. The wilderness, which I'd always seen as a refuge, had shown me a darker side, one that I would never forget. The rugged beauty of the Sierra Crest always had a way of calling me back. After a stressful year, I knew I needed a break from the chaos of city life. A solo hiking trip into the heart of the mountains seemed like the perfect escape. The Sierra Crest had always been my sanctuary, a place where I could lose myself in the serenity of nature. The first few days were everything I had hoped for. The trails were challenging, yet the reward of breathtaking views made every step worthwhile. I rarely encountered other hikers, which suited me just fine. I was looking for solitude, a chance to clear my head and reconnect with the wild. On the fourth day, I decided to take a less traveled path. The map showed an old logging road that had been mostly reclaimed by the forest. It promised a scenic overlook, and the idea of finding a spot untouched by the usual crowds was too tempting to resist. As I ventured deeper into the forest, the trail became more overgrown, with tall grasses and shrubs encroaching on the path. Fallen trees occasionally blocked my way, but I pushed on, excited by the adventure. The air was crisp, the sky a perfect blue, and for a moment, everything felt right. But then I noticed it, an odd smell in the air, something out of place in the wilderness. It was earthy, pungent, and somehow familiar, yet I couldn't quite place it. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to follow the scent off the path, pushing through the dense undergrowth. That's when I stumbled upon it, a hidden clearing deep in the forest, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Row after row of marijuana plants, carefully cultivated and surrounded by makeshift irrigation systems and solar panels. It was an illegal grow operation, hidden away from prying eyes. My first instinct was to turn and leave, but before I could move, a man stepped out from behind a tree, blocking my path. He was rugged, with a weather-beaten face and cold eyes that sent a shiver down my spine. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, his voice low and threatening. "I'm sorry, I just got lost," I stammered, trying to sound calm. "I'll leave now." "Too late for that," he said, pulling out a walkie-talkie. "We've got a problem. Someone found the site." Panic surged through me. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, my heart pounding in my chest. Behind me, I could hear him shouting into the walkie-talkie, and the sound of more footsteps crashing through the forest. I was being hunted. I had no idea where I was going. The trail was long gone, and all I could do was run, hoping to put as much distance between myself and them as possible. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees a blur as I sprinted through the dense foliage. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I couldn't stop. The sound of pursuit was growing closer, and I knew I had to keep moving. I stumbled upon a creek and decided to follow it downstream, hoping the water would mask my scent and cover my tracks. Night was falling, and the forest grew darker. I slipped and fell, scraping my hands and knees on the rocks, but I forced myself to get up and keep going. The shouts were still echoing through the trees, closer now, but I didn't dare look back. Finally, I found a small cave hidden behind a thicket of bushes. I crawled inside, pressing myself against the cold, damp rock, trying to control my breathing. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped right outside the cave. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't find me. I could hear them talking in harsh whispers, frustrated at losing sight of me. One of them kicked a rock, sending it skittering across the ground, but they didn't check the cave. After what felt like an eternity, the voices began to fade as they moved on. I waited, terrified to move, but knowing I couldn't stay there forever. Hours passed before I finally crawled out of the cave, every muscle in my body trembling with fear and exhaustion. I needed to find a way out, but the night was pitch black, and I had no idea where I was. By dawn, I was still moving, my senses on high alert. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I was terrified they would find me again. I stumbled through the forest, no longer sure if I was heading in the right direction. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon an old fire lookout tower. It was abandoned, but it offered a vantage point. I climbed up and scanned the horizon, hoping to see a road or a building, anything that could lead me to safety. In the distance, I saw smoke. It could be a campsite or another part of the grow operation. I couldn't be sure. I decided to head in the opposite direction, hoping to avoid any further danger. The sun was high in the sky by the time I found a dirt road. Relief washed over me, but I knew I wasn't safe yet. I followed the road, my pace quickening with the hope of rescue. Hours later, I heard the sound of an engine. I ducked into the bushes, fearing it might be the growers. A beat-up truck rattled past, driven by an old man. I hesitated, then decided to risk it. I stepped out and flagged him down. "Please, can you help me?" I asked, my voice shaking with fear. "I got lost, and there are men after me." He eyed me warily, but nodded. "Get in. Let's get you to safety." As we drove, I told him everything. He listened, his expression grim. He promised to take me to the nearest town and contact the authorities. We reached the small town by evening, and he dropped me off at the sheriff's office. I was safe, but the ordeal left me shaken to my core. The sheriff listened to my story and launched an investigation into the grow operation. They assured me I was safe now, but I couldn't shake the fear that had gripped me. I left the Sierra Crest earlier than planned, my love for hiking tainted by the terror I had faced. Even now, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, the memory of that chase flashing through my mind. The wilderness, once my refuge, now felt like a place of lurking danger. I knew it would take time to heal, but I also knew I would never forget what happened in those mountains. We had been looking forward to this trip for months. The idea of a family getaway to the vast and stunning landscapes of the Red Rock Canyon had filled our conversations and dreams. My wife, Laura, our 2 kids, Emily and Jake, and I had planned everything meticulously. We needed this, a break from the daily grind, a chance to reconnect with each other in the tranquility of nature. The drive was long but beautiful. The red hues of the desert canyon stretching out under a clear blue sky. By late afternoon, we reached our campsite, a secluded spot with breathtaking views of the canyon. The kids were thrilled, running around and exploring, while Laura and I set up the tent and unpacked our gear. The evening was perfect. We built a fire, cooked a simple meal, and watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. As the stars began to twinkle, we settled in for a night of storytelling and marshmallow roasting. It was exactly what we had hoped for, a peaceful escape from the hustle of everyday life. That night, I woke up to a noise outside the tent. At first, I thought it was just the wind rustling the trees, but then I heard it again. Something or someone moving around our campsite. My heart began to race. I quietly slipped out of my sleeping bag and peeked through the tent flap. In the dim light of the campfire, I saw a figure rifling through our supplies. My blood ran cold as I realized this wasn't just an animal scavenging for food. I watched in silence, trying to make out who it was. The figure moved with a purpose, methodically searching through our things. It wasn't long before he was joined by another man, and then another. Panic surged through me. These weren't random hikers. They were thieves, and they were targeting us. I carefully woke Laura and whispered what I had seen. We needed to protect the kids and find a way to safety. We decided to wait it out, hoping the men would take what they wanted and leave. After what felt like hours, they finally regrouped and disappeared into the darkness. Laura and I exchanged a look of relief, but it was short-lived. We knew we had to get out of there, and fast. At first light, we quietly packed up our campsite, trying not to wake the kids until the last possible moment. They sensed our urgency and cooperated without question, their usual chatter replaced by nervous glances. We needed to reach the ranger station a few miles away, but as we made our way back to the main trail, I heard footsteps behind us. I turned to see the group of men approaching, their expressions menacing. They had discovered we were leaving and were determined to stop us. I told Laura and the kids to run ahead while I stayed behind to slow the men down. I grabbed a large branch, my heart pounding in my chest as I faced the approaching thieves. They demanded our supplies, convinced we had something valuable. I tried to reason with them, but they were relentless, closing in on me. I swung the branch, trying to keep them at bay, but there were too many of them. Laura and the kids managed to put some distance between us, and I broke away, running after them. The men gave chase, their shouts growing louder as we raced through the forest. We reached a steep incline and scrambled up, hoping to lose them in the dense foliage. The climb was treacherous, and we slipped and stumbled, but we couldn't afford to stop. The men were close behind, their determination frightening. At the top of the incline, we found a narrow path that led to a cliff overlooking the canyon. With no other options, we followed it, praying it would lead us to safety. The path was perilous, and one wrong step could send us tumbling into the abyss. Just as we thought we had lost them, The men reappeared, blocking our way forward. We were trapped, with the cliff on one side and the men on the other. I knew we had to fight if we wanted to survive. I picked up another branch and stood my ground, ready to protect my family. The leader of the group lunged at me, and we struggled, each trying to gain the upper hand. Laura and the kids huddled together, terrified. In the chaos, I managed to knock the leader off balance, sending him tumbling down the cliff. The other men hesitated, shocked by their leader's fall. Seizing the moment, I shouted for Laura and the kids to run. We bolted past the stunned men and continued along the path, not daring to look back. The remaining thieves, now leaderless, were disorganized and less determined. We had a chance to escape. We ran until we reached a clearing where we saw the ranger station in the distance. Relief washed over us as we stumbled towards it, our legs barely able to carry us any further. We burst into the station, breathless and frantic, and told the rangers what had happened. They quickly organized a search party and went after the men. They assured us we were safe now and provided us with food and water. The ordeal had left us shaken, but we were grateful to be alive and together. Later we learned that the rangers had apprehended the remaining thieves. They had been targeting campers, stealing supplies, and causing havoc in the park. We were lucky to have escaped with our lives. The experience left a deep scar on our hearts. Our peaceful family camping trip had turned into a nightmare, but it also brought us closer together. We realized the importance of staying vigilant and prepared, even in the most serene settings. As we drove back home, we talked about the trip and what we had learned. The kids were brave and resilient, and Laura and I were proud of how we had all handled the situation. The memory of Red Rock Canyon would always be a mix of beauty and terror for us. We decided to take a break from camping for a while. The decision to take a trip to the Pine Valley Forest with my old college friends was supposed to be a way to reconnect and relive some of our younger days. We hadn't seen much of each other since graduation, and we thought a weekend in the wilderness would be the perfect way to bond. There were 5 of us: Mark, Jake, Sarah, Emily, and me, all eager to escape the monotony of our daily routines. We packed our gear and headed out early on a Friday morning. The drive was filled with laughter and stories of our college escapades. Pine Valley was known for its dense woods, rugged terrain, and isolated beauty. We planned to camp by a secluded lake, spend our days hiking, and our nights around a campfire, reminiscing about the good old days. The first day went as planned. We hiked a few miles into the forest, found the perfect spot near the lake, and set up camp. The air was fresh, the sky clear, and the sounds of nature surrounded us. As the sun set, we gathered around the fire, roasting marshmallows and swapping stories. It was exactly what we had hoped for, a chance to unwind and reconnect. The next morning, we decided to explore deeper into the forest. We set off early, with our backpacks loaded with water and snacks, ready for a day of adventure. The trail was more challenging than we expected, with steep climbs and thick underbrush, but the thrill of discovery kept us going. By midday, we found ourselves in a part of the forest that felt completely untouched by civilization. It was quiet, almost eerily so, with only the sound of our footsteps and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. We stumbled upon a clearing, and that's when things took a dark turn. In the middle of the clearing were several makeshift hunting blinds, camouflaged with branches and leaves. It didn't take long for us to realize that these weren't just for hunting deer or small game. This was something more sinister. The blinds were strategically placed, and there were signs that people had been living there for some time. Empty food cans, spent shells, and even a couple of crude traps set up around the perimeter. "What the hell is this?" Jake muttered, his voice laced with unease. "Let's just get out of here," Mark suggested. But it was too late. Before we could move, we heard voices, angry, aggressive voices, and the sound of footsteps approaching fast. We froze, our hearts racing. Out of the trees emerged 3 men, their faces hardened by years in the wild. They carried rifles slung over their shoulders and wore the kind of grim expressions that sent a jolt of fear through us. "Well, well, look what we have here," the leader of the group sneered. "You all lost or just stupid?" "We're just hiking," I said quickly, trying to keep my voice steady. "We didn't mean to intrude. You've seen too much," he growled. "Now you're part of the game." The realization hit us like a punch to the gut. These weren't just hunters. They were playing a sick game, hunting more than just animals. And now, we were their prey. "Run!" I shouted, and we bolted in different directions, panic fueling our desperate escape. I could hear the others crashing through the underbrush, but I didn't dare look back. The sound of gunfire cracked through the air, and I ducked instinctively, adrenaline surging through my veins. The forest that had felt so peaceful just hours ago now seemed like a twisted labyrinth, each tree and rock a potential hiding place or deadly trap. I ran blindly, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my mind racing with fear. They were close, too close. I could hear their shouts, their laughter, like it was all just a game to them. I stumbled, falling hard onto the forest floor, my hands scraping against the rough ground. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. I could feel them gaining on me, their presence like a dark shadow closing in. Then I saw it, a narrow ravine just ahead. Without thinking, I threw myself into it, tumbling down the slope, the earth and rocks tearing at my clothes and skin. I landed at the bottom, gasping for breath, my body aching from the fall. I pressed myself against the dirt wall, trying to make myself as small as possible. The voices grew louder, and I knew they were right above me. I held my breath, every muscle in my body tense with fear. I could hear them arguing, their boots crunching on the ground above. I prayed they wouldn't look down, that they would pass by without noticing me. After what felt like an eternity, the voices began to fade. They moved on, still searching, still hunting. I stayed where I was, too terrified to move, too exhausted to even think of trying to find the others. I didn't know if they were safe, if they had managed to escape. All I knew was that I had to survive. Hours passed before I dared to crawl out of the ravine. The forest was darkening, the light fading as the sun dipped below the horizon. I had no idea where I was, no idea where my friends were. My only thought was to keep moving, to find a way out of this nightmare. It took me all night to navigate through the forest, every sound making me jump, every shadow a potential threat. I finally stumbled onto a dirt road at dawn, my legs barely able to carry me any further. The relief was overwhelming, but the fear still clung to me, refusing to let go. I followed the road until I reached a small town, where I found help. The local authorities launched a search, but by the time they reached the clearing, the men were gone. leaving no trace behind. My friends and I were lucky to have made it out alive, but the experience left scars that would never fully heal. Pine Valley Forest, once a place of beauty and adventure, had become a symbol of terror. The memories of that weekend would haunt us forever, a reminder of how quickly a peaceful trip can turn into a fight for survival. The Pacific Crest Trail had always been on my bucket list, a challenge I wanted to conquer on my own. My name is Lisa, and after months of planning and preparing, I finally set out on my solo journey. The idea of walking the trail alone both thrilled and terrified me, but I was determined. I needed this, a break from the stress of my daily life, a chance to prove to myself that I could do it. The first few days were everything I had imagined. The trail was breathtaking, with sweeping views of mountains and valleys that stretched out endlessly. I felt a sense of freedom I hadn't experienced in years, the weight of the world lifting off my shoulders with each step I took. I met a few other hikers along the way, all of them friendly and supportive. They admired my courage, and I couldn't help but feel proud of myself. But on the fourth day, something changed. I noticed him for the first time as I took a break by a small stream. He was standing on the trail, not too far behind me, just watching. I didn't think much of it at first. There were other hikers on the trail, and it wasn't unusual to see someone more than once. But there was something unsettling about the way he stared, his eyes cold and unblinking. I continued on, pushing the unease to the back of my mind. But as the day went on, I saw him again and again. Each time he was just a little closer, his presence like a shadow that I couldn't shake. By the time I reached my campsite that evening, I was on edge, every rustle in the bushes making my heart race. I tried to tell myself I was being paranoid, that he was just another hiker on the same path. But as I set up my tent and started a small fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the forest floor, and I felt more alone than ever. As darkness fell, I heard footsteps approaching. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned to see him standing at the edge of my camp, just beyond the light of the fire. He didn't say anything, just stood there, his eyes locked on me. I forced myself to stay calm, to act like everything was normal. "Hi," I called out, trying to sound casual. "You lost?" "No," he replied, his voice low and steady. "Just passing through." But he didn't move. He just kept watching me, and every instinct in my body screamed that something was wrong. I knew I should tell him to leave, but fear had me frozen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he turned and walked back into the darkness, disappearing among the trees. I sat by the fire for hours, too scared to go into my tent, too scared to sleep. Every noise, every snap of a twig made me jump. I kept telling myself he was gone, that I was safe, but the fear wouldn't go away. Eventually, exhaustion overcame me, and I crawled into my tent, clutching my knife in my hand. I didn't know how long I slept, but I woke with a start to the sound of my tent being unzipped. Panic flooded through me as I saw his silhouette in the moonlight, his face twisted into a menacing grin. He lunged at me, and I screamed. lashing out with the knife. I managed to cut him, but it only seemed to make him angrier. He grabbed my wrist, twisting it until I dropped the knife. And then he was on top of me, his hands around my throat. I fought with everything I had, kicking and scratching, desperate to get him off me. In a moment of sheer terror, I remembered the small canister of bear spray in my pack. I reached for it, barely able to breathe as his grip tightened around my neck. I fumbled with the cap, my vision blurring, but I managed to aim it at his face and press the trigger. The spray hit him square in the eyes, and he screamed, releasing his grip on me as he stumbled back, clawing at his face. I didn't waste a second. I scrambled out of the tent, grabbing my pack and running into the night. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were going to give out. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran until I found another campsite, where a group of hikers were just waking up. I burst into their camp, gasping for breath, and told them what had happened. They quickly gathered their things and helped me contact the authorities. By the time the rangers arrived, he was long gone. They searched the area but found no trace of him. I was safe, but the experience left me shaken to my core. I cut my trip short and left the trail the next day, unable to shake the fear that had taken hold of me. The Pacific Crest Trail, which had once represented freedom and adventure, now felt like a place of danger and darkness. I knew it would take time to heal, to feel safe again. But I also knew I had survived, and that gave me strength. I would never forget what happened out there, but I wouldn't let it stop me from living my life. Well, that's all for tonight. I hope you have sweet dreams, if you can sleep at all after that. Don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so you never miss any of our chilling stories. We upload new videos every Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. EST. And remember, if you've got a story that keeps you up at night, send it in. You might be our next protagonist. This is your Fear Master, signing out.